The moment they put a price on my marriage, I understood exactly how disposable I had become. $3 million. That was the number sitting in bold ink on the folder across the table, heavy and clean, like it had never passed through dirty hands. The conference room smelled like polished wood and expensive coffee. The kind of room where decisions were made quietly, where lives were rearranged without raising voices. I remember thinking how calm everyone looked. My wife didn't meet my eyes. She kept her hands folded over her stomach, protective, instinctive. Pregnant. Not with my children. With her boss's twins. The words still felt unreal in my head, like a sentence written in someone else's handwriting. Her father cleared his throat, the sound sharp in the silence. "This is the cleanest way," he said. "No dragging things out. No damage to reputations." Reputations. I stared at the folder. At the neat stack of papers. At the signature line waiting for me like a trapdoor. $3 million to disappear. I had spent 17 years building a life with her. 17 years of early mornings, late nights, compromises I never kept score of because I thought that was what love was. I worked jobs I didn't love so she could chase promotions she did. I learned to swallow pride because stability mattered more than ego. And now, in under 5 minutes, all of it had been reduced to a transaction. Her mother leaned forward slightly. Not unkindly. That somehow made it worse. "You'll be taken care of," she said. "You're still young. You can start over." Start over. Like this was a bad lease. Like the life I thought I was living could just be returned and exchanged for something newer. I felt something crack in my chest, not loud, not dramatic. Just a quiet fracture. The kind you don't notice until you try to breathe too deeply. My wife finally spoke. Her voice was low. Controlled. "I'm sorry," she said. "This isn't how I wanted things to happen." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because of how carefully she chose her words. Not that it happened. Just how. I wanted to ask her when she stopped wanting me. When I became optional. When loyalty turned into inconvenience. But I already knew the answer. It happened slowly. It always does. Her boss, confident, older, established, had everything I was still chasing. I was grinding, building, delaying gratification. He had already arrived. I looked around the table again. No one was angry. No one was ashamed. This wasn't a confrontation. It was a cleanup operation. Her father slid the folder closer. "This protects everyone," he said. "Including you." That was the moment something inside me went very still. Because I realized they didn't see me as a man who had been betrayed. They saw me as a potential problem. A loose end. A risk to be neutralized. $3 million wasn't compensation. It was hush money. I thought about yelling. About flipping the table. About demanding answers that wouldn't change anything. I thought about how good it would feel, for maybe 30 seconds. Then I imagined the months that would follow. Lawyers. Courtrooms. Headlines whispered through social circles. Being painted as bitter. Greedy. Vindictive. The man who couldn't let go. I imagined her standing next to him, hand on her stomach, telling people she tried to handle it peacefully. And I imagined myself becoming exactly what they expected. That's when I understood the real test wasn't about money. It was about control. I took a slow breath. My hands were steady when I reached for the pen. Her mother blinked, surprised. Her father relaxed, just slightly. My wife's shoulders sagged in relief. I smiled. It wasn't a big smile. Just enough to unsettle them. "Before I sign," I said, my voice calm, "I want one thing clear." They all leaned in. "I walk away clean," I continued. "No stories. No implications. No rewriting history to make this easier for you." Her father nodded immediately. "Of course." I looked at my wife then. Really looked. Her eyes were glossy but not with tears. With something closer to guilt, or maybe fear. I wondered if she felt relieved that I wasn't fighting. Or disappointed that I wasn't. I wondered if part of her had expected me to beg. I didn't. I signed. The sound of the pen on paper felt louder than it should have. Final. Just like that, my marriage was over. They stood up quickly, like people leaving a meeting that had run exactly on schedule. Handshakes were offered. Polite words exchanged. Promises about wire transfers and lawyers following up. My wife hesitated by the door. "I really am sorry," she said again, softer this time. I nodded. "I know." It wasn't forgiveness. It was acceptance. When I walked out of the building, the sun was blinding. The city moved the same way it always had, cars honking, people rushing, life continuing without hesitation. I stood there for a moment, the folder tucked under my arm, and felt the weight of everything I had just lost. My home. My identity as a husband. The future I thought I was building. And yet, beneath the grief, there was something else. For the first time in years, there was nothing expected of me. No role to perform. No image to maintain. No one watching to see how I'd react. They thought I had sold my dignity. What they didn't understand was this. I hadn't agreed because I was weak. I agreed because I was done explaining myself to people who had already decided who I was. As I got into my car, my phone buzzed. A message from an old friend. "A doctor. Call me when you're free." Something about the timeline doesn't sit right. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then I turned the phone face down. Not yet. Some truths don't need to be rushed. Some silences are worth more than noise. And as I drove away, I realized something that would stay with me long after the money hit my account. They thought this was the end of my story. But it was only the part where I stopped trying to be understood and started paying attention. People expect noise when a man loses everything. They expect anger. Drunken messages. Public breakdowns. A spectacle they can point to and say, "See? That's what happens when you fall apart." I gave them none of that. The divorce went through in record time. No delays. No counterclaims. No emotional statements read aloud in sterile courtrooms. Just signatures, stamped papers, and a judge who barely looked up before declaring a 17-year marriage legally concluded. When it was over, the silence followed me everywhere. Friends didn't know what to say. Some sent awkward texts, checking in, "Hope you're okay, let me know if you need anything," the kind of messages that sound supportive but require no response. Others disappeared entirely. I don't blame them. People get uncomfortable when they realize loyalty can be optional. The story spread anyway. Not the truth, never that, but a version polished enough to be repeated without guilt. I had taken the money. That was the headline. No one asked what it cost me. No one asked why a man would choose quiet over war. They filled in the blanks themselves, and I let them. Because correcting people takes energy. And at that point, I was conserving mine. I moved into a small apartment across town. 1 bedroom. White walls. Cheap blinds that rattled when the wind picked up. It wasn't punishment. It was intentional. I needed somewhere that didn't echo with memories. The first night, I slept on the floor. Not because I didn't have a bed yet, but because lying flat felt grounding. Like pressing myself against reality to make sure I was still here. I stared at the ceiling until morning, replaying moments I'd missed while I was busy being reliable. The late nights she said were meetings. The way she'd started guarding her phone. How success had changed her posture, straighter, sharper, while mine had slowly folded inward under responsibility. I wasn't angry at her. Not yet. I was angry at myself. For confusing endurance with love. For thinking stability was enough to keep someone who wanted admiration. Work became easier after that. Not because it mattered more, but because it mattered less. When you lose the thing you thought defined you, everything else rearranges itself. I showed up. Did my job. Left on time. No one noticed the difference. That was the part that hurt the most. One evening, about 2 weeks after the divorce finalized, my phone rang. It was my mother. "I heard," she said gently. I closed my eyes. "I figured you would." She didn't ask questions. She never does when she senses I don't want to explain. "I'm proud of you," she said instead. "For what?" "For not becoming someone you'd regret." I didn't respond. My throat tightened in a way I refused to acknowledge. After the call, I opened a kitchen drawer I hadn't touched since moving in. Inside was the envelope my lawyer had handed me weeks ago. Thick, sealed, untouched. DNA results. I slid the drawer closed. Not yet. Timing matters. That same night, I met my old friend Aaron for a drink. He was one of the few who hadn't vanished. Maybe because he'd seen me at my worst years ago, before marriage, before ambition had turned into obligation. He studied me over the rim of his glass. "You look calm," he said. "I am. That's not normal." I smiled faintly. "Neither is my life." He hesitated. "People are talking." "I know. They think you folded." "I did." "That doesn't bother you?" I took a slow sip. "What bothers me is how loud they'd be if I hadn't." Aaron nodded, not fully convinced, but respectful enough not to push. "Her wedding's coming up," he added carefully. I felt it then, a brief pressure in my chest. Not pain. Recognition. "I know." "You going?" "No." "What will you do instead?" I didn't answer. Not because I didn't know, but because some things don't need witnesses. That night, alone in my apartment, I finally allowed myself to feel the weight of what I'd lost. Not her. The version of myself that believed patience would be rewarded. I stood by the window, city lights flickering like distant signals, and made a quiet promise. I would not chase closure from people who needed my silence to protect their lies. I would let time do what confrontation couldn't. My phone buzzed again. A message from Aaron. "Whatever you're planning, make sure it's for you." I set the phone down and looked at the closed drawer. So, not out of revenge. Out of respect, for myself. Because walking away without a scene isn't weakness. Sometimes it's strategy. And sometimes, the loudest statement a man can make is refusing to explain himself at all. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday. No warning. No build-up. Just a thick, cream-colored envelope sitting in my mailbox like it belonged there. Her handwriting. I recognized it instantly. Careful, elegant, practiced. For a moment, I considered leaving it where it was. Letting it bake under the afternoon sun. Pretending I'd never seen it. But avoidance only works when you're afraid of what's inside. I wasn't. I carried it upstairs, set it on the kitchen counter, and poured myself a glass of water before opening it. I don't know why. Maybe some part of me wanted the moment to feel ordinary. Controlled. The paper was heavy. Expensive. The kind of invitation designed to impress people who care about those things. Her name. His name. Together. I read it once. Then again. A vineyard outside the city. Early summer. Midday ceremony. Reception to follow. There was even a small card tucked inside. "We hope you'll attend." No apology. No explanation. Just a polite gesture wrapped in etiquette, like manners could erase context. I laughed then. Not loudly. Just a short breath through my nose. They didn't want me there. They wanted proof I wasn't dangerous. An appearance would mean approval. Absence could still be explained. I placed the invitation face down on the counter and sat at the small kitchen table, staring at the wall as memories crept in uninvited. 17 years together, and this was how I was being written out. Not as a villain. As a footnote. Later that evening my phone buzzed. A number I hadn't saved, but knew. I let it ring once. Twice. Then I answered. "Hello." Her voice was cautious. "I wasn't sure you'd pick up." I wasn't sure either. The pause. Heavy. Measured. "I sent you something," she said. "I got it." Another pause. "You don't have to come," she added quickly. "I just thought that I'd feel included." I finished for her. She exhaled. "I thought it would be mature." The words sat between us like a challenge. "I'm not coming," I said calmly. Silence. "Okay," she said finally. Too quickly. Like she'd rehearsed acceptance in case this happened. "I hope you're doing well," she added. "I am." That was true, and she heard it. After we hung up, I didn't feel relief. I felt clarity. Because the invitation wasn't about reconciliation. It was about reassurance. They needed to believe I was done. That night, I opened my laptop and pulled up my calendar. I stared at the wedding date for a long time, then created a new entry. Same day. Same time. A private appointment. I didn't label it. I just saved it. The following weeks passed quietly. Too quietly. Evenings alone. I started noticing things about myself I hadn't had space to see before. How much energy I'd spent managing someone else's happiness. How rarely I'd asked what I wanted, outside of stability, outside of obligation. The money hit my account without ceremony. No thrill. No relief. Just confirmation. People assumed it changed everything. It didn't. One evening, Aaron came by with takeout and unsolicited honesty. "You know people think you're broken, right?" he said, setting the bags down. "I know. You okay with that?" I shrugged. "It's temporary." He studied me. "You sound like someone waiting." "I am." "For what?" "For the moment when silence stops being mistaken for surrender." He frowned. "That sounds dangerous." "It's only dangerous to people who rely on noise." The night before the wedding, I barely slept. Not from nerves. From anticipation. I stood in the shower longer than usual, letting the water run hot, thinking about how easily stories get accepted when no one challenges them. I dressed simply the next morning. No suit. No symbols. As I left the apartment, I glanced once at the unopened envelope still tucked in my drawer. Tomorrow, they'd be celebrating. Tomorrow, they'd believe the past was buried. And tomorrow, I'd keep my promise. Not to them. To myself. Because the most important choice I'd made since signing those papers wasn't walking away. It was choosing when to stop being silent. There's a strange clarity that comes when you stop arguing with reality. Once I accepted that I had been replaced, not gradually, not accidentally, but deliberately, I stopped asking the kinds of questions that only lead to self-blame. I stopped replaying conversations, stopped wondering which version of me might have been enough. Instead, I started noticing details. The things people assume don't need to be questioned. Aaron called me early one morning. Too early for small talk. "You free today?" he asked. "I can be. But come by the clinic." His tone was careful. Professional. But underneath it, I heard something else. Concern. The clinic smelled like antiseptic and old magazines. I hadn't been there in years, not since Aaron switched from emergency work to private practice. We sat in his office, door closed, blinds half drawn. "I shouldn't even be saying this," he began. "Then don't," I said. He ignored me. "The timeline you mentioned before, about the pregnancy. It doesn't line up as cleanly as everyone thinks." I leaned back in the chair, hands folded. Prepared. "Explain." He slid a piece of paper across the desk. Not a report. Just notes. Dates. Margins scribbled with questions. "Based on what you told me," he continued, "there's a window here that doesn't match the story they're telling. Not impossible, but unlikely." I stared at the paper. Not surprised. Because doubt had already planted itself weeks ago. Quietly. Patiently. "What are you saying?" I asked. Aaron met my eyes. "I'm saying no one bothered to verify the most important assumption in the room." That assumption being, the children belonged to the man everyone wanted them to belong to. I nodded slowly. "They didn't question it," I said. "Because it was convenient." Aaron exhaled. "Do you want to know the truth?" I thought about my wife's parents. Their urgency. Their confidence. I thought about how quickly they'd move to control the narrative. "I don't just want the truth," I said. "I want it documented." He hesitated. "If you go down this road, you won't be able to pretend you don't know." "I already can't," I replied. The tests were arranged quietly. No drama. No lawyers. No accusations. Just facts waiting to be confirmed. Aaron warned me about expectations. About disappointment. About hope turning into something corrosive if it wasn't managed. I listened. Then I asked the only question that mattered. "How long?" 3 weeks, he said. "Maybe 4. I checked the date in my head. The wedding was in 5. "Good," I said. He frowned. "Good. Timing matters," I replied. The waiting was harder than I expected. Not because of anxiety, but because of restraint. Every instinct in me wanted to open the drawer. To tear the envelope open the moment it arrived. To reclaim something, dignity, truth, control, immediately. But impatience is just fear dressed up as urgency. I refused to let fear decide the moment. Days passed. Then weeks. I settled into routines designed to keep my mind sharp and my emotions contained. Early runs. Late nights reading. Long, quiet dinners alone. People around me assumed I was healing. I was preparing. One afternoon, my phone buzzed with a notification from my bank. Another reminder of the money I hadn't touched. I stared at the number for a long time. $3 million buys comfort. It doesn't buy clarity. That night, I pulled the envelope from the drawer and held it in my hands for the first time. The paper felt heavier than it should have. Final. Decisive. I didn't open it. Instead, I placed it back and locked the drawer. Not because I was afraid of the answer, but because I understood something they didn't. Truth is most powerful when it arrives on its own terms. When it interrupts certainty. When it forces people to confront what they were so sure they knew. Aaron texted me 2 days before the wedding. Results are in. Call me. I didn't. Not yet. I stood in my apartment that evening, lights off, city glowing outside the window. I thought about how easily men are dismissed when they choose composure over chaos. How quickly silence gets mistaken for weakness. I smiled to myself, because soon, silence would no longer be an option. And when the truth finally spoke, it wouldn't need my voice at all. Some things don't need to be announced. They just need to be timed. By the week of the wedding, the story had already settled. People like stories that end cleanly. They like villains and victims clearly labeled, lessons neatly wrapped. And in the version circulating quietly through offices, group chats, and polite conversations, I was already finished. I was the man who took the money. The man who couldn't compete. The man who lost everything. I heard it secondhand, of course. Through pauses in conversations when I entered a room. Through the way people softened their voices when they mentioned her name. Through the careful distance acquaintances kept, as if heartbreak were contagious. No one asked how I was doing. They assumed they knew. I let them. The days leading up to the wedding passed slowly, like time itself was stretching, testing my patience. Every morning, I woke before my alarm. Not from anxiety, but from awareness. A sense that something irreversible was approaching. I stayed off social media. Still, fragments reached me. Photos of place settings laid out in white and gold. Close-ups of flowers arranged with obsessive care. Smiling faces captioned with words like new beginnings and true love. The irony wasn't lost on me. They were celebrating certainty. I was living inside doubt. On Thursday evening, Aaron stopped by unannounced. He didn't come inside at first, just stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets. "You sure you don't want to talk?" he asked. "About what?" He nodded toward the drawer without needing to see it. "The results." "Not yet." He studied me for a long moment. "You know this could change things." "It already has," I replied. He hesitated. "You okay carrying this alone?" I smiled. "I've carried worse." When he left, the apartment felt quieter than usual. Not empty, contained. Like the calm inside a sealed room before pressure shifts. The night before the wedding, I slept deeply for the first time in weeks. No dreams. No restless thoughts. Just darkness and rest. In the morning, I woke with the sun and stood by the window, watching the city come alive. Somewhere across town, they were preparing vows. Promises spoken with absolute confidence. I made coffee, ate breakfast, read a few pages of a book I'd been carrying around but never opened. I dressed simply. Not because I didn't care, but because I did. I wanted nothing on me that belonged to them. Mid-morning my phone buzzed. A message from an old colleague. "Saw the pictures. You holding up?" I typed a response, then deleted it. Some questions don't deserve answers. Instead, I turned my phone face down and focused on the appointment saved on my calendar. Same time as the ceremony. Same date. No description. Just a block of time I had claimed for myself. As noon approached, I felt it, a familiar pull. The urge to look. To confirm. To witness. I resisted it. Because the truth didn't need my attention to exist. At exactly 12:30, my phone vibrated again. An email notification. Sender, Theron. Subject line, final results. I didn't open it. I let the phone rest in my hand, feeling its weight, the way one feels the heft of a loaded question. Across the city, they were standing in front of guests dressed in optimism, surrounded by people who believed the story they'd been told. I imagined the moment. The music, the smiles, the practiced calm. And I understood something then. They thought the danger had passed. They thought the truth was buried under paperwork and money and silence. They were wrong. Because truth doesn't disappear. It waits. I finally stood, walked to the drawer, and took out the envelope. My hands were steady. I sat at the table and placed the envelope in front of me, unopened. I didn't tear it open. Not yet. I checked the time. The ceremony would be underway. Guests seated. Phones silenced. Attention focused forward. That was when I opened the envelope. Slowly. Deliberately. Because whatever was inside wasn't just information. It was the end of a lie that had been mistaken for a foundation. And once I knew the truth, really knew it, there would be no going back. I took a breath. And turned the page. There are moments in life when time doesn't speed up or slow down. It sharpens. The room felt smaller as I unfolded the report, the paper whispering against itself. Clinical language. Tables. Percentages. The kind of truth that doesn't care how you feel about it. I read the first line once. Then again. Then I sat back, letting the chair creak beneath me. The twins were not his. Not even close. For a long moment I felt nothing. No triumph. No anger. Just a quiet confirmation settling into place, like a key finally turning all the way in a lock. I'd spent weeks preparing myself for this moment, rehearsing reactions I wouldn't allow myself to have. I thought there might be relief, or vindication, or some cinematic surge of satisfaction. Instead, there was clarity. And clarity is dangerous. I scanned the rest of the report slowly. Dates. Markers. Probabilities so precise they felt almost cruel. The science didn't speculate. It didn't accuse. It simply stated what was. Across the city, vows were being spoken. I pictured them standing there, hands joined, confident in the version of reality they'd built together. Confident that the past had been settled with money and signatures. They had mistaken closure for truth. My phone buzzed. Aaron. I answered this time. You saw it, he said. Yes. The pause. You okay? I'm focused. He exhaled slowly. You understand what this means. I do. Legally, the implications were immediate. The story they were relying on, publicly and privately, collapsed under its own assumptions. The man standing at the altar wasn't stepping into fatherhood. He was stepping into exposure. You want me to send it? Aaron asked. Yes, I said. To everyone who needs it. There was no hesitation in my voice. This wasn't revenge. It was correction. When the call ended, I sat alone again. The report spread across the table like evidence from a life I'd already outgrown. I thought about the meeting in that polished conference room. About how confident they'd been. How final everything had sounded. $3 million to erase a man. They never considered that silence might be temporary. That some men don't raise their voices because they're waiting for the truth to speak first. Another vibration. A text message from a number I didn't recognize. What did you do? I didn't reply. Outside, sirens wailed somewhere in the distance. The city moved on, indifferent to personal collapses. I folded the report carefully and placed it back into the envelope. Not to hide it, but because I didn't need to stare at it anymore. The truth was already in motion. I poured myself a glass of water and stood by the window, watching clouds drift across the afternoon sky. There was no joy in what I felt. Only release. Because the hardest part of betrayal isn't being wronged. It's being asked to doubt your own reality. They had tried to buy that doubt from me. And for a while, the world believed they succeeded. But truth doesn't care how much money changes hands. It arrives when it's ready. My phone buzzed again. This time, I didn't need to look. I already knew. The ceremony was over. And everything that followed would never be quiet again. I wasn't there when it happened. That's the part people find hardest to understand. They imagine revenge requires a front row seat. That justice demands witnesses. That a man needs to watch the moment everything burns in order to feel whole again. They're wrong. I was standing in my kitchen, rinsing a coffee mug, when my phone began vibrating non-stop on the counter. Calls. Messages. Missed calls stacking so fast the screen blurred. I didn't rush to answer. I dried my hands, took a breath, let the moment arrive fully before acknowledging it. The first message I opened was from Aaron. It's chaos. That was it. No details. No commentary. I didn't need more. The next message came from an unfamiliar number. Please call me. We need to talk. I set the phone down again. Across the city, the lie had finally collided with daylight. Later, the fragments reached me, piecemeal, incomplete, but vivid enough. The report had been delivered discreetly. A lawyer. A sealed envelope. No announcement. Just facts placed into hands that had been gripping certainty minutes earlier. Confusion first. Then denial. Then the kind of panic that spreads when too many people realize at the same time that they've built something on air. Guests whispering. A ceremony paused mid-script. A groom stepping away from the altar, face pale, reading words that refused to rearrange themselves into something manageable. The twins were not his. Not legally. Not biologically. Not even close. I imagine my ex-wife standing there, suddenly exposed, not as a villain, but as someone who had mistaken control for certainty. I imagined her parents realizing the money hadn't bought peace. Only delay. My phone rang again. This time, I answered. What did you do? Her father demanded. No greeting. No restraint. I stayed quiet, I said. That report is accurate. Silence. You had no right, he finally said. I almost laughed. I had every right, I replied calmly. You just didn't think I'd use it. He hung up. Minutes later, my ex-wife called. I let it ring once before answering. Please, she said, her voice breaking. This wasn't supposed to happen like this. I closed my eyes. It was always going to happen, I said. You just chose the timing. You humiliated us. I felt the weight of that word. No, I corrected gently. The truth did. She was crying now. Not performative. Not strategic. I don't know what to do, she whispered. For a moment, the past pressed in. 17 years of shared language. Familiar vulnerability. Then it passed. That's not my responsibility anymore, I said. The call ended. I stood alone in my apartment, the quiet settling back in like it always did. There was no satisfaction in what I felt. Only finality. By evening, the story had spread, faster than truth ever should, but slower than lies usually do. Messages came in from people who hadn't spoken to me in months. We didn't know. You handled this with class. I'm sorry. I didn't respond. Not because I was angry, but because I no longer needed to be seen. The world had adjusted. The narrative had corrected itself. And for the first time since that conference room, I felt light. Not because they had fallen, but because I was finally free from carrying what wasn't mine to begin with. That night, I slept without thinking about them. Tomorrow would come, and it would belong to me. The morning after everything collapsed, the world felt strangely normal. Sunlight through the blinds. Distant traffic. The quiet hum of a city that didn't care who had been exposed the day before. I stood in the kitchen with a cup of coffee, watching steam rise, and understood something that had taken me years to learn. Peace doesn't arrive with noise. It arrives when the noise stops mattering. My phone was still face down on the counter. I knew what was on it. Messages, questions, apologies, curiosity disguised as concern. People wanting a statement. Wanting to know how I felt. Wanting proof that I'd either been destroyed or vindicated. I didn't give them either. Because neither was true. I wasn't ruined. And I didn't win. I was simply finished carrying a story that was never mine to hold. Later that morning, I went for a walk. No destination. No urgency. Just movement. The kind that reminds you your body still belongs to you after everything else has been negotiated away. As I walked, I thought about the man I'd been at the start of all this. The one who believed endurance was love. The one who thought being needed was the same as being valued. The one who confused silence with peace instead of strategy. I didn't judge him. He did the best he could with the version of himself he had at the time. But I wasn't him anymore. The money sat untouched in my account. $3 million that had once been meant to erase me. To turn a complicated truth into a clean exit. I knew what I would do with it. Not all at once. Not impulsively. Carefully. On my terms. Because money can buy distance. It can buy time. What it can't buy is self-respect. That has to be claimed. I stopped at a small park and sat on a bench, watching a father teach his son how to ride a bike. The boy wobbled, panicked, then steadied himself when the man let go. That moment, when support disappears and balance becomes your responsibility, felt familiar. I smiled. In the days that followed, the calls slowed. The story lost its heat. Scandal has a short lifespan when there's no one feeding it. My ex-wife tried once more to reach out. A long message. Apologies. Explanations. Fear threaded through every sentence. I read it once. Then I deleted it. Not out of cruelty. Out of clarity. Some chapters don't need closure. They end because they're no longer relevant. I met Aaron for dinner that week. He raised his glass. To patience, he said. I shook my head. To choosing yourself. He smiled. That too. That night, back in my apartment, I opened the windows and let the air move through the rooms. The space no longer felt temporary. It felt earned. I sat at the table where I'd opened the envelope days earlier and realized something quietly profound. They had paid me to disappear. Instead, I had reintroduced myself to myself. Not as a husband. Not as a victim. Not as a problem to be solved. But as a man who knows the difference between being quiet and being powerless. The future didn't feel certain. And for the first time in a long while, that didn't scare me. Because certainty is overrated. What matters is alignment. With your values. With your limits. With the truth you're willing to stand by, even when no one is watching. I turned off the lights and stood in the dark for a moment, breathing in the stillness. Tomorrow I would start building again. Not a life designed to be approved. But one that couldn't be bought. And that, I realized, was worth more than any number written on a check.